Okay, Philip, you can take it away. They can hear us.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Philip Wiedmeyer with Transportation Energy Partners. And also joining me today is Ken Brown, our consultant for Transportation Energy Partners in Washington. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this webinar, where we're going to provide an outlook for clean transportation policy and the upcoming Energy Independence Summit next month in DC, and talk about preparing for Capitol Hill Day during the EIS event. Next slide. First, I want to give a shout out and thank to our sponsors of EIS. We would not be able to host and conduct this event if it weren't for our sponsors, and so our gratitude. Be sure to thank them when you come to the summit next month. Next slide. So just a little background. Transportation Energy Partners, as many of you probably know, but in case you don't, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides policy support to the Clean Cities Coalitions and their 15,000 stakeholders nationwide. We keep coalitions and stakeholders informed of key policies at the federal level, programs that impact the activities of Clean Cities Coalitions and the clean transportation industry, and identify funding opportunities that the clean transportation industry can utilize to advance the markets. We also play a key role in educating the policymakers about the importance of advancing the markets for clean vehicles and fuels. Clean slide. The Energy Independence Summit, as you know, will be held February 11th through 13th. We will have leaders from both the administration and congressional leaders involved on the agenda for the summit. There will be a presentation on VW settlement investments. Many of the industry leaders, clean transportation industry leaders who are sponsors, will be in attendance and participating in various panels during the program on Monday. On Wednesday morning, following Capitol Hill Day, we will have roundtable discussions with key agencies, including DOE, EPA, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the Department of Agriculture. On Monday night, we will be doing a Salute to Clean Cities reception, honoring leaders of the Clean Cities program on the heels of the 25th anniversary of the program, and that'll be Monday evening. A full day on Capitol Hill. Bring your walking shoes for meetings with Congress. Last year, we scheduled and participated and conducted close to 250 visits on Capitol Hill. We'll be breaking up in teams, and we'll be talking about that more later in this webinar. And on Tuesday evening, following the Capitol Hill Day, we will have a reception at the UPS townhouse that's right on Capitol Hill. And you can get more information on our website address, www.transportationenergypartners.org. Next slide. So, as is often the case, the policy for federal clean transportation, the future of it remains somewhat uncertain. With the Democrats now leading the House of Representatives and chairing all the committees, the House is expected to bring back the Select Committee on Climate Change. Although bipartisan support for the Clean Cities program remains strong in Congress, and that's a result of the efforts that have been made over the years by the Clean Cities coalitions and the clean transportation industry and all the stakeholders in helping to build that support on Capitol Hill. DC was consumed and paralyzed for 6 weeks or so with the shutdown. The administration is likely to continue to propose cuts to clean energy programs. The president will submit his proposed budget next month. And budget negotiations, as usual, but maybe even more so this year, will be a little tricky with the split between the control of the House and the Senate. There is a possibility that on a bipartisan basis that some infrastructure legislation could move forward, but that remains to be seen. Next slide. So for TEP, our clean transportation priorities for this fiscal year would be to, and we'll go in detail, more detail on each one of these, but the main points are to extend the tax incentives for alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure, many of which expired and have started and stopped over the past few years. Preserve the renewable fuel standard, which is annually always under attack from the petroleum industry. To increase federal funding for key alternative fuel programs, like, for instance, the DERA program or CMAQ, or the Clean Cities program at DOE. We have a kind of a regulatory, not a legislative issue in terms of FHWA, the Buy America waivers for alternative fuel vehicle projects that have been suspended recently. So there's work that needs to be done there. And we also would like to see alternative fuels included in any new infrastructure initiatives or legislation that may move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken to go into more details on each of these. Ken?
Thank you, Philip. And hello, everybody. Thanks for being here today, and we look forward to seeing many of you in DC for the Energy Independence Summit on the 11th through the 13th. And if you're on this webinar, it's not too late to register for the summit. So please come to DC. It makes a huge difference. One of the reasons that we've been successful in increasing funding for programs and extending the tax incentives is the effort that people make to come to Washington and be part of our summit every winter. So again, thanks to those of you who are coming, and for those of you who are still thinking about it, there's still time to register and get your plane reservations and come to DC. It's a lot of fun and it's extremely productive. As Philip mentioned, one of our ongoing priorities has been supporting the various alternative fuels industries and the tax incentives that have been in place for a long time. I think, as people know, one of the problems with many of the incentives is that they've been extended on a year or at most 2-year basis, and then they expire, and then they get reinstated retroactively. But the current status, I think, as most people know, is that these incentives for natural gas, propane, biodiesel, the alternative fuel infrastructure credit, the hydrogen fuel cell credits, all expired at the end of 2017. Were not in place for 2018, and there's nothing going forward for 2019. So a major priority is to see these extended. As folks remember, at I think it was in either December of 2017 or early 2018, major tax reform legislation was approved by the Congress and signed by the president. The good news is that there were many who were looking to eliminate the electric vehicle tax credit, but that was preserved during the tax did not get included into the tax reform legislation. One thing to take note of is we do have new leadership in the Congress in terms of tax policy. On the Senate side, then Senator Hatch from Utah was the chairman of the Finance Committee. He has since retired. And now Senator Grassley from Iowa, who actually has chaired this committee in the past, is back as chair of the Finance Committee. And the good news there, like Senator Hatch, he's a big supporter of clean fuels. And then Senator Wyden from Oregon remains the senior ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee. On the House side, with the Democrats now assuming the majority in the House, we now have Richard Neal from Massachusetts, who's the new chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, which writes the tax policy in the House, and Kevin Brady, who was previously the chair, is now the senior ranking Democrat on the committee. In terms of the outlook, as we talked about, the shutdown and the funding negotiations have been consuming Washington since December and are still very much at the forefront, and will be, hopefully those will all be resolved. The deadline is February 15th, so while folks in Washington there will still be a lot of discussion about that, though the various legislative committees are beginning to get organized and hold hearings on other matters as well. There's pretty good bipartisan support in the Senate for extending the expired incentives, and the incoming House Democratic leadership is also largely supportive. The outgoing Republican leadership in the House was, I would say, lukewarm at best. I mean, not all of them were opposed, but the key tax folks were not enthusiastic about extending the incentives. But now with, I think, the Democrats in charge in the House and with bipartisan support in the Senate, I think we're hopefully in a good place to see the extenders move forward. I think the challenge is we need to have a legislative vehicle to move it forward, and we have to get past the funding dispute that's been occupying everybody, and hopefully that will happen shortly. And so having people in DC during the summit will be a great time to deal with this. The other thing that has received increasing attention is the electric vehicle tax incentive, tax credit. I think folks know that there is a $7,500 tax credit for the first 200,000 electric vehicles sold. And then after the manufacturers reach that target amount, the credit then is halved for 2 quarters and then halved again for another 2 quarters and then eliminated. What's new is that Tesla has hit the cap, and they did so in the second quarter of last year, and General Motors hit the cap in the fourth quarter of 2018, and Nissan is forecast to hit the cap in 2020 or maybe even sooner. So what this means is that for these manufacturers, the credit is coming to an end. So there has been both an effort to, on one side, to get rid of the tax credit, and then there's been an effort on another side to enhance and extend the credit in different ways. And there was legislation on both fronts introduced in the last session of Congress. This piece of legislation called the Fairness for Every Drivers Act was introduced by Senator Barrasso from Wyoming. who happens to be the chairman of the Senate Environment Committee, and this would actually end the tax credit and put a user fee for electric vehicle drivers. It did not go anywhere, but it's in play, out there at least. And then on the other side, there's been an effort led by Senators Merkley and Heinrich and Cortez Masto in the Senate, and by Congress members Welch and Rosen in the House, that would extend both the vehicle and infrastructure tax credit for another 10 years through 2028. So this is all very much in play and a topic of discussion, largely because, partly because of tax reform last year, but also because of the fact that the manufacturers are reaching the volume target that starts to phase out the tax credit. In terms of the renewable fuel standard, we've seen some progress over the past year or so, in that the agency for the first time raised the volume, and they added 500 million gallons of overall advanced biofuel, and then again, did it again for 500 million gallons for 19, and then 2020 even further, after pretty much holding the volumes at a flat level since 2016. So that's been good news. There's still some unresolved technical issues, including small refinery exemptions, issues related to the RIN market, that still need to be dealt with. I think the other thing is that EPA has now triggered a process which is involved in the legislative statute, where they need to basically reset the volumes for all of the RFS categories, and so they've started that process. So this is a very important process. So they've begun to work on a proposed rule that would reset all of the volumes, and they've begun meeting with stakeholder groups last summer, and this proposed rule could impact the overall volumes for 2020, and then the biomass biodiesel volumes for 2021. Will not affect the biodiesel volumes for 2020. But this is a big step prescribed by the statute. It's an opportunity to relook at the whole standard, and hopefully it's an opportunity to increase the volumes for both advanced ethanol and biomass-based biodiesel. And then again, Congress continues to look at reforming the RFS. There are all kinds of proposals out there, and issues related to sunsetting it, looking at different volumes, all kinds of issues, but it's very much in play. And the basic dynamic is that the petroleum industry is looking to eliminate or significantly limit the RFS, while the biofuels industry is looking to for opportunities to preserve it, strengthen it, and continue to increase the volumes. And again, this will be impacted by the, at least in the House side, by new leadership on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which will be chaired by Congressman Frank Pallone from New Jersey. And obviously, these are the messages for the RFS. In terms of federal funding, our two main priorities are looking to maintain at the bottom line and hopefully increase funding for the Clean Cities program, and then also in terms of the current appropriations year, which began on October 1, 2018 and goes through September 30th, 2019, the DOE spending bill has already been signed into law and includes $37.8 million for Clean Cities, which is the same as FY18 and a good number, an increase over previous years where it was typically around 20 to 25 million. So we've seen a good increase over the past couple of years, and we're going to look to maintain that. I think as folks know, the EPA funding bill was not finalized, and EPA was involved in the shutdown, and it still remains to be seen. We should end up somewhere between $50 and $100 million for the diesel emission reduction grants. The House bill included $100 million, and the Senate bill included $50 million, and last year it was $75 million. So we should, hopefully we'll end up at least $75 million for FY 2019, but that still is yet to be determined by the ongoing budget negotiations that are happening. In terms of the 2020 appropriations process, which we will be focused on when people are in DC for the summit, the time schedule is the president will propose his budget in February. It's supposed to be the first Tuesday, next Tuesday. They've already said it will be late because of the shutdown and the ongoing negotiations. So the president and his administration are looking to finalize the budget. If the past has been any indication, I think it's not going to look great in terms of clean energy and clean transportation, but that remains to be seen. The appropriations subcommittees will consider their legislation typically in April and May. It might be a few weeks or several weeks later this year, depending on what happens with the current negotiations and when the administration's budget comes out, but it will be in the spring. There will be House and Senate floor action in the summer and final legislation in the fall. One thing that's going to make this year a little tricky is that when the Trump administration came in, they worked with Congress and they negotiated overall budget numbers for discretionary funding for FY 2018 and 2019. They came to an agreement for 2 years. Those agreements have ended, and there is no agreed upon overall dollar amount for FY 2020, which is the year we're coming into, and so that's could complicate the efforts to move forward with all of this in a timely fashion. It's possible that the House will pick their own number, led by the Democrats, and the Senate will pick their own number, led by the Republicans, and they'll just move forward in that fashion. But the fact that there was an overall agreement in 2020 helped lay the groundwork for a much smoother process, though it's never smooth, as we know, since we're still struggling with finishing 2019 . But so anyway, that's all in play. Here's the key appropriations leaders are all the same. The only difference is the House, the Democrats will now be chairing the key subcommittees. So Marcy Kaptur from Ohio is now the chair, and Mike Simpson is the ranking member. And then for Interior, Betty McCollum from Minnesota is now the chair, and Ken Calvert is now the senior ranking Republican on that subcommittee. This is very important for folks when you're in Washington, D.C. The key part of the process is for us to get our members your individual members of Congress to make a specific request to the Appropriations Subcommittee that indicates that funding of the Clean Cities program and funding of the EPA Clean Diesel grants are priorities. And that's been our strategy that's been extremely effective. We need to do it again this year. So what you need to do is to find, and each individual member has to submit their requests, their priorities to the Appropriations Subcommittee. It'll typically be sometime between the middle and end of March. Could be a little later this year. And so we need to find out the deadlines for each of your individual members so that you can send a letter or make your request to your member and then urge them to include it in their request to the subcommittee. So that is our strategy. You need to get your requests into all your members of Congress to show broad-based coalition stakeholder support, and then to follow up with your congressional offices and ask them to submit your request to the subcommittee. So that is very important, and we'll be talking about that again when you're in DC for your meetings. And even if you're not coming in DC, to DC, and you can still reach out to your members of Congress and find out what their appropriations request process and deadline is, and you can submit requests even if you're not in DC. Back home, it's usually either done by form for some offices or by just sending in a letter to your members of Congress. And if you have questions, we can help you out here. Speaking of questions, if people have questions, you may obviously type them in the question box. Next slide. Infrastructure legislation. So I think as people have heard, the president's expressed interest in infrastructure. Members of both parties have expressed interest in infrastructure. And I think with the Democrats now in the majority in the House and chairing the committees, I think there will likely be infrastructure legislation moving at least in the House. And so we are working with others on proposals to include alternative fuel infrastructure. The timing for all of this remains clear, but this is an issue that we're going to want to talk about in our meetings with members of Congress. And obviously one of the issues that is an obstacle is how do you pay for all of this? Congress, I think as many of you know, has not increased the gasoline tax, which is the primary mechanism for funding transportation infrastructure, since the 80s. And that includes, it hasn't even indexed it for inflation. So actually the amount of money in terms of buying power has been declining for more than 30 years. And so that still remains an issue, and we'll see how they deal with that. But we will be involved in these discussions. Finally, as Philip mentioned earlier, we still have a problem at the Federal Highway Administration where they are holding up funding for hundreds of clean vehicle projects across the country while they're figuring out whether they're going to alter their implementation of various Buy America policies. And what we've been arguing to DOT is it's fine if you want to implement new Buy America policies, but in the meantime, use the old policies so that we can keep the projects moving. We've had several discussions with DOT. We pried some projects loose, but we still have a major problem. And I think we're going to have to get Congress involved to solve it. And so that, again, will be a focus of our meetings while folks are in DC. So with that, That's to help you prepare on the policy side. And then Philip, before we move to the next section, I want to look and see if we have any
Questions?
Any questions? Let's see if I can read these questions. Somebody wants to know what the temperature is going to be in DC. I don't know. Look at weather.com. That's where I look. Hopefully it'll be warmer than it is today. When I was walking my dog this morning, it was 8 degrees. And that's nothing compared to what people are experiencing in the Midwest. Let's see. So one question is, will you be able to download the slides? The slides will be on our website. Yes, and we will send you a link to that. What are the thoughts about the shutdown and its impact on what we're doing? The answer is I think the government will be open, number one, because it's been extended through the 15th. There are no guarantees in this business, but I would be shocked if they don't come to some agreement I would be surprised if there's another shutdown even after it, but it is possible that the discussions of people will be talking about the shutdown, so just be prepared for that. But I think people are looking to move beyond the shutdown. I think the biggest impact the shutdown is going to have on us now that the government's been reopened is that it's delaying, at least to some degree, the beginning of the FY 2020 appropriations process. But outside of that, I think we will get a good reception and people are looking to move forward. Will we be providing a leave behind packet? The answer is yes. We will have information with our priorities, as well as key letters to members of Congress on some of our issues. So the answer to that is yes. There's another question. Can you please explain the outline for day one of the summit? Where do we convene? The day one of the summit, February 11th, is at the Westin Georgetown Hotel on M Street, and yes, it's on the website. Will renewable biomethane be included in the renewable fuels legislation? Philip, do you know? I do not know the answer to that.
I'm not up to speed on that. No, I don't know whether that's in there or not.
So I can't answer that question. There's a question on
I do think that, Ken, that's renewable natural gas, but the biomethane, that's same thing as renewable natural gas, which is included in the renewable.
Yeah, it's absolutely included. So if that's the question, it is included. I'm not sure if renewable renewable natural gas includes renewable biomethane, but if that's the question, it is included in the renewable fuel standard. And here's another question, which is, and I don't know a full answer to this, but is there discussion about incentives for medium and heavy duty electric vehicles? And I know that's Irvi has asked that. I'm gonna get back to you, Irvi. I'm gonna talk to some folks and find out what the discussion of proposals and
the latest information will be available at the summit from our panelists.
Correct, and we'll try and get you some information in advance as well. All right, with that, let's go to preparing for Capitol Hill Day.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I'm gonna do this part, and some of you have probably seen this before. We've done this in previous years to help us achieve results. The secret to getting results is having a good plan, no matter what it is, right? So in the policy arena, education is the key to getting our policy priorities enacted like we would like to see them. So it's important for us all to be prepared for the Capitol Hill Day visits. And so today we're going to just cover a few things that we say every year, but doesn't mean that it's any less important, because it's always important to have good preparation for Capitol Hill Day. And the education of policymakers is important because it helps to increase the visibility of your organization. If you get more members, you have more funding available. So that's an advantage of educating the policymakers. Help you to advance the policies, which we all benefit from in terms of funding for the Clean Cities program, funding for the EPA DERA program, tax incentives, renewable fuel standard, whatever the policy may be, this is the way to advance the policy. And it helps you to build long-term relationships, which is the key currency in politics, is relationships, relationships, relationships. And it gives you credibility with these policymakers for you to have credible information that helps them to make decisions. So another way to help build those relationships is to identify ways that you can help elected officials. And the easiest thing is to be a good source of ideas and credible information. They have hundreds of issues that they're dealing with every year and every month and every week and every day. And if you are established as a go-to source on alternative fuels and clean transportation issues, it's very likely that the members of Congress and their staff will turn to your organization for advice and information on what the impact is. Another good way to help them is to introduce them to your stakeholders and community leaders. Politicians love exposure, and so you're helping them increase exposure and meet new people, and that helps your relationship with that member of Congress. And it helps you build relationships not only at the national level, but with local and state offices. You should be doing the same thing, not just with congressional leaders. Next slide. Next slide, please, Ken.
I'm working on it. There you go.
Okay. And always remember, all politics is local. it's important for you to relate how the policies you are advocating for impact what's going on in your neighborhood, so to speak, in your backyard, in the congressional district, in your state. Provide information on facts and figures on how many jobs are being created by clean fuel vehicles and fuels, how it's benefiting the local area. Provide examples of local projects and programs, and try to do that concisely. We have provided examples in the past of how other coalitions concisely present that information to give an overview of the projects and activities going on. And if your state has 14 members of Congress, break it down by those 14 districts. Show them what's going on in each area. That's what they're going to be mostly interested in, what's going on in their backyard. They also care about what's going on overall in the state, but they're most interested in what's happening in their district. And
hey, Philip, if
yes.
I can just add there, good examples are if you've opened up a new, CNG station, or if a couple of, school districts have converted their fleets to, alternative fuel, cleaner school buses, or, you've a new plant that makes vehicles or buses is located in your district, or an existing plant is increased jobs, but and anything, the more concrete, the better. If you had a workshop, that's a good thing, but anything that talks more about projects, vehicles, stations, jobs, plants, new businesses being created, all things that are both helping the local economy, helping the air get cleaner, and helping the vehicles use new technologies is great stuff to talk about. Sorry, Philip, to interrupt there.
No, those are all good points. Name fleets that are specific fleets, organizations, be they private or public fleets that are using alternative fuels. Those are all great examples that gives them a real picture of this is real world stuff that's really happening. Okay. When you go to your meetings on Capitol Hill, they're likely to ask you a lot of questions. Some may not ask any questions, but important to follow up and follow through. If they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, don't try to wing it. Tell them you don't know, but you'll find out, and get back to them on it. Always a nice touch is after your meetings to send a thank you note to those that you met with for their time and listening to what you had to say. Stay in touch with them. Communicate with them often. Put them on your newsletter list. Send reports. Provide updates to those congressional staffers. They'll look at it. You may not hear back from them, but keep that constant communication and dialogue going with them. Always invite elected officials to any local events you have. If you're having an opening or a workshop or that they could kick off at, that gives them visibility, and it helps to add credibility to the event you're doing, and also attracts media coverage, because where the elected officials are, the medias are going to really follow, and that helps to increase the reach and exposure that your event may have. Identify opportunities. If you're doing a press conference, ask elected officials to participate in that with you, and give updates on policies that they're involved in and what their thoughts are on clean transportation and fuels. Next slide, please. So for preparing for the meeting, I said at the first thing is wear comfortable shoes, because you will be walking a lot on Capitol Hill, making the visits. try to keep everything concise. If you could prepare a one-pager with a background on your organization and examples of projects that are going on in your area and specifically laid out by the various congressional districts, that's very impactful. As we've talked about, use examples of those local projects. Make sure you have business cards and pens and papers. Keep your cell phones on vibrate or silent. That's an interruption. And again, wear comfortable shoes. Next slide, please. In your meetings, you should be brief. These staffers and members of Congress have very busy schedules during the day. If you have 15 to 20 minutes with them, that will be a plus. You may get lucky and have 30 minutes, or a member might come in and talk with you, but expect meetings to last no longer than 15 to 30 minutes. Keep your presentation short and make sure to ask them if they have any questions. Be specific in your request for actions, and as Ken said, we will have that kind of material on the policy priorities that you can leave behind with them. Know which committees your members are on and background them, and use that information to tailor how you make your presentation to them. Be factual. Get up-to-date information. Don't get 3-year-old data. Have the most current information that's available on the issues and there's nothing wrong with bringing a cheat sheet, so to say, if in order to provide factual information. And on every issue there are pros and cons. So over the years, I've always found it helpful that if you're able to articulate both the pros and the cons of any issue, that helps build your credibility with that member or that staffer. Be respectful. They may not agree with you and probably will not agree with you on everything, but you should respect their views, and you will have an opportunity in the future to work together on things you do agree on. So, next slide. And to help you prepare for Capitol Hill Day, Transportation to Any Partners will provide assistance for you, and Ken will cover what would be available to help you in terms of scheduling meetings and sample letters and talking points and handouts or press releases, all of those things. Ken?
Yeah, thanks, Philip. So for Capitol Hill Day, we will be very organized. Typically, and I think it will be the same this year, we will have 25 to 30 teams, and we will be doing more than probably closer to 30 teams or more, and we will be having around or more than 250 congressional office meetings, House and Senate office meetings. And the way we'll be organized is the teams will be organized primarily by state. So we'll have usually one team per state. Like there will be a New Jersey team and a North Carolina team and a Connecticut team. A couple of states will have more than one team that are large. Like we usually have at least 2 teams in California. Ohio will probably have 2 teams. We'll usually have an Eastern Pennsylvania and a Western Pennsylvania team. But for the most part, we'll have one team per state. For most of you, if you're involved with the Clean Cities Coalition, you know what state you're going to be in. For those of you who are with a national company and you have, plants or activities in multiple states, and want to give us a call and talk about where you would be most effective, please get in touch with us and we can make sure you're in a place where we think you can, add the most value. So we are working, and we're in the process right now of finalizing putting those teams together. So there will be teams. A few of you are scheduling your own meetings, but for most of you, we're scheduling the meetings for all the teams. So those will be set up. You don't need to set up your own meetings. So if you want to know what team you're on, or if you want to know, who you're likely going to be meeting with, please feel free to give us a call. My contact information will be on the last slide. We will be providing talking points to prepare you for the meetings. We'll be sending those out next week, and then also a packet of handouts on our federal policy priorities that you can leave behind. And then we'll also prepare a sample appropriations request letter that you can use with your members of the House and Senate for both the Clean Cities program and the EPA Clean Diesel Grants program. We'll have some other letters that will be in the packet that will go from our organization on issues like extending the tax incentives. And then we'll also give you a sample local press release that you can use with your local media to let them know that you're coming to DC, and you might be able to get a little press coverage for the fact that you're going to DC and these are the issues that you work on, and that helps give a little nudge to your members of the House and Senate to let them know that this stuff is a priority. And you could highlight, for example, some local projects that are going on, or where there are jobs and plants in those things locally that you can use. So that is the kind of assistance we're going to provide. And then we have a few more questions here that I'm going to look at and see if we can answer. All right, we answered that one. Will we get a schedule in advance? You likely will not get a schedule in advance. We're working on all the schedules right now. All I can tell you is that you will have a schedule, and you will be meeting with you will be meeting with both Senate offices in your state and many of the House member offices in your state. And we will prioritize the House member offices based on the committees that they're on. So the most important people to meet with are those on the appropriations committees, because they do funding, the tax committees, because they do the tax incentives, and then the energy and the transportation committees, because they do energy and transportation infrastructure issues. So those will be our priorities. Somebody mentioned, so RNG and biomethane are the same thing. So just to clarify again, renewable natural gas or biomethane is included in the renewable fuel standard, and it's been one of the key policies that has been successful in advancing that industry. Another question, will we be able to get a schedule in advance? I just answered that. Let's see, what else do we have here? Where can we find information on our members' appropriations request process and deadlines? You will need to talk to the office to get that. It's typically not published. So basically, you need to call your House or Senate office and ask for the appropriations staffer. That's the best way to do it. So ask for the staff member that handles appropriations. And sometimes, usually it's one, sometimes it's more than one on different topics. And so then it would be energy appropriations and EPA appropriations. And then ask that individual what the request process is. If you can't get that person, ask whoever answers the phone in the office, and they should be able to give you that information. Very good question. For those who cannot lobby, how do we make sure that we are not part of conversations with such an agenda? I know there are a handful of people who, for a variety of reasons, who you work for, you're not enabled to lobby. So, it's typically an office policy. From lobbying, though, there are certain restrictions for certain kinds of organizations, like 501c3 organizations. They can only spend a certain amount of their budget on lobbying activity. But for those of you who work for an organization where they're not permitting you to engage in lobbying, I think you have to figure that out. You can either be in an office and just listen into the conversations and not be a part of them. You can say, I'm just here to give you an update on projects that we're working on. So there are different ways to do that. And I think the best thing would be, if you have further questions on that, would be to get in touch with me and we can talk through the options for those individuals. But there's, nothing in law that prohibits anybody in lobbying. But if you have an organization, like you might work for a state energy office, or you might work with a city, or you might work with the Council of Governments, and that those folks either have other priorities or don't want you, for whatever reason, engaged in quote unquote lobbying activities, I think the best thing would be to ask your bosses, hey, can I sit in these meetings and, just learn and be quiet, or can I sit in there and just say, hey, we want to update you on on the progress that we're making. And I think for a more detailed discussion, please call me at 202. I'm going to move to the next slide so you can write down my contact information. 202-674-7777. We can talk more about that.
Ken, if I might add on that, another strategy that can work in a situation like that is, if you have a stakeholder with you, is let the stakeholder make the request, and you're just participating in the meeting and providing information and educating. You're not asking them to do anything specifically, which would be lobbying, but your stakeholder could make that request.
Do you have the hours for the Clean City reception for Monday evening? The reception will be after the program on Monday evening. It will start at about 5:30, and it usually goes till 7:30 or so, 5:30 to 7:30 or 8. Going back to renewable natural gas, it appears that the RFS only applies to liquid biofuels. I don't think that's correct.
That's not correct.
The renewable fuel standard applies to renewable natural gas. It is a qualified fuel under the standard. Should we invite congressional staff and members to the UPS reception? Yes, you are more than welcome to invite congressional staff and members of Congress to join us at the UPS reception. We usually get a handful of folks who take us up on that. And it's a great thing to do, and it's a really fun reception. UPS is a great host and a great partner in all things clean fuels, and it's a really fun event. So please feel free to, when you're in your meetings with congressional staff or members of Congress, to invite them along. And in the meetings that we're scheduling, we typically add that in our meeting requests too. And that handles all the questions. So with that, we thank you for participating in today's webinar. We look forward to seeing those of you who are coming to the summit. If you're not registered for the summit, you should get registered or encourage your stakeholders to come. The more people who are here, the more Clean Cities coalitions that are represented, the more successful we're going to be in this process to continue to have policy support for the industries that we're working with. Philip, do you have any concluding remarks?
Just thanks to everyone for your time today, and please don't hesitate to follow up if you have additional questions or need additional information.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you in DC.
Bye now.